Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're going to be tackling, well, it's a topic that hits close to home for a lot of people. The money system itself, that thing we use every single day but don't often really question. Well, a financial expert named Rosalind Wanjiru, you might know her as FOIG from the Beyond Soma YouTube channel. Well, she has some pretty strong opinions on why this system might be failing a lot of people. She even argues that saving your way out of poverty is basically impossible with the current setup. So we're going to be diving deep today. We're going to be looking at some history, and we're going to be looking at some economic theory. We're going to try to break down FOIG perspective for you.
Yeah, what I find really fascinating about Foeg's argument is that it's not just like a complaint about the system, Like she actually takes us through this kind of historical evolution of how money has worked, starting with, barter, moving to gold, and then ending up with what we have now, which she calls debt-based.
Okay, so let's unpack this debt-based thing a little bit. So FOIG's claiming that most of the money we use isn't actually backed by anything tangible, like, gold. Instead, it's created through loans and debt.
Exactly. And that's a really key part of her whole argument, is that this debt-based system might be inherently kind of flawed because it encourages this cycle of borrowing and spending, which ultimately makes it very, very hard to accumulate real wealth. And she uses she just uses some pretty startling statistics from Kenya to illustrate this point. She points out that people are racking up trillions of shillings in debt, and they're even like putting up household items as collateral just to make ends meet.
Yeah, that's a really stark picture. Makes you wonder, are people just borrowing out of necessity? Or is there like this lack of understanding about how this debt-based system even works?
Yeah, and that's where Frowen's point about financial literacy comes in. She's arguing that many people just might not fully grasp how money is even created or the long-term, implications of accumulating debt, especially in a system where the value of money can, just erode over time because of things like inflation.
So she's saying it's not just about like being careful with your spending. It's about understanding the underlying mechanics of the system itself.
Exactly. And to understand those mechanics, she kind of takes us on this historical journey. So she argues that earlier systems like barter or the gold standard actually had kind of built-in mechanisms that encouraged wealth creation and actually limited how much debt you could have.
Okay, so let's break that down a little. So with barter, you're basically just directly trading goods and services, right? So there's no need for money at all. And then with the gold standard, each unit of currency represents like a fixed amount of gold, which then limits how much money a government can print.
Exactly. And Foeg's arguing that these systems, while they weren't perfect, had a lot more transparency and a lot more stability than our current debt-based system. And she claimed that this shift away from the gold standard in 1971, when the US dollar was no longer directly tied to gold, well, that led to this system, where governments could essentially just print money whenever they wanted to.
So how does she connect this historical context to the struggles that people are facing today?
Well, she argues that this ability to just print money without actually having anything tangible backing it, well, it has led to inflation. And that basically means your money buys less over time. She gives this really striking example from Kenya. A house that cost 1 million shillings in 2005 now costs 20 million. So imagine you're saving diligently for years, only to find that your money has significantly less purchasing power.
Yeah, that's a really tangible way to understand the impact of inflation. It's not just this abstract economic concept. It directly affects, people's ability to afford the basics, even if they're making a decent living. And it sounds like Foegg is suggesting that this isn't just happening in Kenya, right?
Oh, absolutely. She points out that even in developed countries, tons of people are struggling. She sets a statistic that 75% of Americans can't even afford a $400 emergency expense.
Wow, that's eye-opening. So it seems like even if you're working hard and you're trying to save, the system itself might actually be working against you. And Foegg, she doesn't shy away from, pointing fingers.
No, not at all. She argues that the current system might even be intentionally designed to benefit some at the expense of others.
And this is where it gets really interesting. Foegg uses this term wealth extraction to describe this. Can you explain what she means by that?
Sure. So basically, she's suggesting that certain policies and practices, whether it's intentional or not, end up transferring wealth from the majority of people to just a select few. She even compares it to, the actions of conquerors in ancient times who would just plunder resources from, conquered territories.
So she's drawing this parallel between historical forms of exploitation and what she sees happening in our modern financial system. What are some examples that she gives?
Well, she points to the Democratic Republic of Congo, which is a country that's incredibly rich in minerals, but a huge portion of the population lives in poverty. Forg argues that a lot of the wealth generated from these resources is basically just extracted, and it doesn't actually benefit the local population at all.
That definitely raises some questions about like who benefits from the system as it is
Wow.
and who's being left behind. But Foig, she doesn't just focus on the negative, right? She offers some potential solutions as well.
Oh, absolutely. While she does paint a pretty bleak picture of the current system, she does offer some rays of hope. One of her key recommendations is to increase financial literacy. She believes that when people actually understand how this system works, they can start making, more informed choices
Well,
and potentially even break free from these cycles of debt.
so it's not just about learning like how to budget or
Yeah.
save. It's about understanding this bigger picture of how money is created, how
Yeah.
debt works,
Yeah.
and how the system impacts your financial well-being.
Exactly. And this is where her argument gets really, really interesting, because Foig actually advocates for exploring different asset classes, including something called decentralized digital assets, with Bitcoin being kind of her primary example.
Okay, so let's dive into that. What are decentralized digital assets?
Mm.
And why does Foig think they hold this key to a better financial future?
Well, decentralized digital assets like Bitcoin are basically digital forms of money that exist outside the control of governments and central banks.
Okay, so if governments can just print more money whenever they want, devaluing our savings, Bitcoin has a limited supply, making it more resistant to inflation.
Exactly. That's one of the core arguments that Foig makes. She believes that this fixed supply of Bitcoin makes it a potential safeguard against the erosive effects of inflation, especially in a system where governments have so much control over monetary policy.
Foig seems really passionate about Bitcoin,
Mm.
but she sees it as more than just a currency, right? She calls it a way of thinking. What does she mean by that?
Yeah, so Foig believes that Bitcoin represents this really fundamental shift in how we think about money and how we think about power, because it's decentralized. No single entity controls it. And she argues that this has the potential to disrupt the current financial system where, just a handful of institutions hold a lot of power.
So she's suggesting that Bitcoin could, like, level the playing field, giving individuals more control over their finances and reducing the power of these centralized institutions.
Yeah, exactly. That's the idea. She believes that the adoption of digital assets like Bitcoin could lead to a more equitable and a more transparent financial system
Yeah.
where individuals have more autonomy.
It's a compelling vision, but it also raises some questions for me. Like, how practical is it for, everyday people to actually use Bitcoin? Isn't it still, like, pretty complex?
And kind of volatile.
Yeah, those are all valid concerns. And Foig acknowledges that. She doesn't claim that Bitcoin is like a perfect solution or like a get-rich-quick scheme. She stresses that it's a long-term investment that requires patience and understanding and a willingness to learn.
So she's advocating for a more,
Oh.
informed and cautious approach, not just blindly jumping into this world of digital assets.
Exactly. She emphasizes, doing your research
Yeah.
and understanding the risks involved
Mhm.
before investing in anything, especially something as new and, as novel as Bitcoin. It seems like her core message is all about empowerment through knowledge. Like, she wants people to understand the system, whether they choose to, embrace traditional finances, explore digital assets, or find some other path altogether.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. Foig is a huge advocate for financial literacy, and she believes that,
Right.
When people understand how money works, they can make more informed choices about their finances and potentially break free from these patterns that keep them stuck in these cycles of debt and financial instability.
Fogue also touches upon some pretty controversial topics as well, like taxation. She uses a pretty striking analogy, comparing like modern day taxation to the actions of bandits in like a barter system.
Yeah, that's definitely one of her more provocative statements. So essentially what she's arguing is that while taxation is, obviously necessary for governments to function, it can also be a form of wealth extraction if it's not used responsibly and transparently.
So it's not necessarily about being like anti-tax. It's more about advocating for a system where taxes are used fairly and effectively to benefit, society as a whole.
Exactly. And she links this back to her argument about this debt-based system because, when governments accumulate large debts, they often have to resort to higher taxes to actually service those debts. And this can disproportionately burden the people who are already struggling financially.
It sounds like she's calling for a more
Stuck here.
critical examination
Yeah.
of how our financial systems are structured
Yeah.
and how they actually impact, you know, different segments of society.
Exactly. Fowig's not afraid to challenge the status quo and ask some really tough questions. She wants us to move beyond just accepting things as they are and to really consider if there might be better ways to structure our financial systems.
Fowig also spent some time talking about the banking sector, and she argues that while banks, might provide a sense of security, they don't actually protect you against the erosive effects of inflation. She even cites examples of bank failures in Kenya, where people just lost their entire savings.
Right, and that speaks to her concerns about centralized systems in general. When you have a small group of institutions controlling the majority of the money supply, it creates these vulnerabilities. And she argues that decentralized systems, like the one that Bitcoin is based on, are actually much more resilient because they don't have this single point of failure.
So while traditional banks are susceptible to, like, mismanagement, corruption, economic downturns, a decentralized system like Bitcoin is inherently more resilient.
That's the theory, yeah. But it's important to note that, digital assets are not without their own set of challenges and risks.
Right, and Fowig doesn't. She doesn't shy away from those risks either. She really emphasizes the importance of understanding, the volatility and the complexity of digital assets before you actually invest. It's refreshing to hear someone, advocating for caution and informed decision-making in a space that's often characterized by so much hype and speculation.
Absolutely. Fowig is all about empowering people with knowledge. She wants people to understand both the potential benefits and the risks of different financial systems so they can make informed choices based on their own circumstances and goals.
She seems particularly concerned about the impact of the current system on people who are already struggling financially. She argues that this combination of, inflation, debt, and lack of financial literacy creates this, perfect storm that makes it almost impossible for people to save their way out of poverty.
Yeah, it's a very compelling argument. And she points out that even with a steady income, if the cost of living is constantly rising and your savings are being eroded by inflation, it can feel like you're just running on a treadmill, never quite getting ahead.
So what are some practical takeaways for our listeners? If Fowig's right and the system is, kind of rigged against us in some ways, what steps can we take to protect ourselves and build a more secure financial future?
Well, way Fowig's, key recommendations is to increase your financial literacy. Learn how money actually works, understand the different asset classes, and critically evaluate any financial advice you get. Don't just blindly follow the crowd or chase, get-rich-quick schemes.
So it's about becoming an informed and empowered participant in the system.
Yeah.
Not just a passive bystander.
Exactly. And that might mean exploring different financial tools and strategies.
Yeah.
Including, but not limited to, digital assets like Bitcoin.
It's not necessarily about going all in on Bitcoin. It's more about keeping an open mind and exploring different options. That might align with your personal values.
And financial goals.
Exactly. Fowig really encourages us to be open to new ideas, to challenge conventional wisdom, and ultimately to find solutions that work best for our individual circumstances. Fowig's perspective on the money system is both thought-provoking and challenging. She doesn't really offer these easy answers, but she raises some really important questions about how the system works and who it actually benefits.
Her core message really is about empowerment. She wants people to understand that they have more agency than they might realize, and that they have the power to shape their own financial destinies, even within a system that might have its flaws.
Now, what really stood out to me was Fowig's discussion of the psychological aspects of money. She argues that, our beliefs and our attitudes about money can actually have a huge impact on our financial outcomes.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? It's almost like, our mindset about money becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy. If we believe we'll never get ahead, we might make choices that actually reflect that belief.
Yeah, exactly. So it's not just about, these external factors like inflation or debt. Our own internal beliefs about money play a huge role in our financial well-being.
Absolutely. And this is where this idea of financial literacy becomes even more important. It's not just about understanding how the system works. It's also about developing a healthy and empowering mindset around money.
Fowig even compares our current relationship with money to the ancient practice of, sacrificing to deities. She suggests that we've become almost subservient to the system rather than recognizing that we have the power to actually, shape it and change it.
It's a powerful analogy. It really challenges us to kind of question these assumptions that we've inherited
Mm.
about money. She's urging us to reclaim our agency and to see ourselves as like
Yeah.
active participants, not just,
Platform with
passive recipients of the rules.
right. It's about moving beyond just trying to like win in the current system and starting to think about how we can create a more equitable, sustainable system that works for everyone.
Exactly. That's a really key takeaway from FOIC's perspective, I think. She's not just offering individual solutions for how to kind of navigate a broken system. She's challenging us to think bigger, to envision a different kind of financial future, and to work together to make that vision a reality.
One of the things I find so interesting about FOIC is that she doesn't like
Mm.
offer a single prescriptive solution. She presents all of these different ideas, from increasing financial literacy to exploring alternative asset classes
Hmm.
to advocating for policy changes.
Right. Her approach is very much about empowering individuals to find their own path. She recognizes that there's no one-size-fits-all solution, and she encourages people to explore different options
Mhm.
and see what works best for them.
And she seems particularly interested in the potential of technology
Yeah.
to disrupt the current system
I think
and create new possibilities, like her focus on, decentralized digital assets like Bitcoin.
Absolutely. FOIC really believes that technology can be a really powerful tool for positive change. And she sees digital assets as a way to kind of bypass these traditional gatekeepers, create more transparency and accountability, and give individuals more control over their finances.
But she's also realistic about the challenges, right?
Yeah.
She acknowledges that technology alone isn't this magic bullet,
Yeah.
and that it's really important to also address the human factors like greed, fear, lack of awareness that can contribute to,
Financial problem.
exactly. It's about finding that balance between leveraging the power of technology, but also promoting education
Hmm.
and critical thinking
Hmm.
and ethical decision making.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into FOIC's perspective on the money system, what's one key takeaway that we can leave our listeners with?
I think FOIG reminds us that we have more power than we realize to shape our own financial futures and to create a more just and equitable financial system. And it all starts with, understanding the system, questioning assumptions, and being open to new possibilities. That's a great note to end on. It's not about feeling like
Hmm.
overwhelmed or powerless in the face of this complex system. It's about recognizing that we have agency, our choices matter, and that we can collectively create a better financial future.
And remember, the journey starts with education and self-reflection. Ask yourself, what are my beliefs about money? How are those beliefs shaping my choices? And am I playing a game that's rigged against me, or am I actively shaping my own financial destiny?
Thanks for joining us on the deep dive. We hope this exploration of FOIG's ideas has sparked some curiosity and encouraged you to take a closer look at your own relationship with money. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.